Lydia Bell stood barefoot in the mud outside the mercantile, holding one cracked suitcase while the man who had sent for her wedding papers called her damaged goods before half the town. Her stomach had not known bread since dawn, and the blue ribbon on her sleeve, once meant for a bridal bonnet, was being used to tie shut a torn cuff. Snow dusted her hair like ash. No one stepped forward when the storekeeper laughed and said she could sleep with the freight crates if she had no husband to claim her. Then Marshal Caleb Russ rode in for flour, coffee, and lamp oil, his face colder than the wind, and looked once at the trembling woman no one wanted. Before the dust rises, write your country in the comments so I know where this story found you. If you enjoy lonely cowboys, brave women, and love that heals old wounds, subscribe for the next tale. Marshal Caleb Russ had not meant to stay in Hollow Creek longer than it took to buy supplies. His black horse Gideon stamped at the hitching rail while Caleb crossed the muddy street with a sack list folded in his coat pocket. Flour, coffee, salt pork, lamp oil, nails. He had been alone at his ranch 3 days west of town since the last deputy quit, and a man living alone through winter learned to count everything. He counted bullets. He counted matches. He counted how many hours of daylight were left before the prairie froze hard enough to break a wagon wheel. What he had not counted on was a wedding dress lying in the mud. It was not a full dress, not anymore. It had been torn at the hem and stained brown from the road. The woman wearing it stood beside the mercantile steps with one bare foot in the slush and the other wrapped in a strip of flour sack. Her suitcase hung from her hand, split at one corner, and when the wind pushed her shawl open, Caleb saw that her wrist was marked where someone had gripped it too hard. A circle of townspeople had gathered close enough to watch and far enough to deny they were watching. Harlan Voss, the mercantile owner, stood on the top step with his tunes tucked into his vest. He was a thin man, with a clean collar and a cruel little smile that looked practiced. "I told you, Miss Bell," he said, loud enough for the street to hear. "Your arrangement is no longer valid. Mr. Grady paid his fee in good faith for a bride who would arrive on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday. A man cannot be expected to marry a woman who misses her own wedding." The woman lifted her chin, but her mouth trembled. The train broke down outside Miles Crossing. "I walked the last 6 miles," a few women near the church fence whispered. One of them looked at Lydia's muddy hem and turned away as if poverty were catching. A big rancher in a buffalo coat leaned against the hitching posts, amused. Caleb knew him by reputation. Asa Grady, cattle, debts, and fists. He had lost 2 wives, one to fever and one to running away, though only fools said that second part aloud. Asa picked his teeth with a sliver of wood. "A bride who arrives late will leave late too. I got no use for a woman who cannot follow a letter." "I have your letter." Lydia reached into her bodice and drew out a folded paper, creased and damp. "You wrote that you wanted a wife who could cook, mend, keep accounts, and stand beside you before God." Asa laughed. "That was before I saw what the train dragged in." Lydia went pale. Caleb had stood through hangings, gunfights, prairie fires, and men lying with blood in their mouths. He had learned not to move unless moving mattered. A marshal who moved too soon made noise. A marshal who moved too late buried people. Harlan Voss snatched the letter from Lydia's hand before she could stop him. "Paper is not worth what debt says it is. Your passage was advanced through my store, your meals charged, your room in the station house charged, and the replacement ticket to send you back east will be charged too. Until paid, your suitcase stays with me." Lydia clutched the handle tighter. "It holds all I own." "Then all you own is collateral." The painful thing was not the suitcase. It was the way she looked at the crowd afterward, searching for one face that might remember she was human. She found none. Caleb stepped up onto the boardwalk. The crowd quieted because his coat carried a marshal's badge and his revolver sat low on his hip. He was not a loud man. Cold men rarely needed to be loud. Give her the letter, Caleb said. Harlan blinked. Marshal, this is a civil matter. Then civility ought to be present. A low murmur passed through the street. Asa straightened. You looking to buy trouble, Rust? He came for supplies. Then buy supplies. Caleb looked at Lydia. Her eyes were gray, not wheat gray, but storm gray. She was shivering so hard the suitcase latch clicked against the frame. Pride was keeping her upright. Hunger was taking its price beneath it. What does she owe? Caleb asked. Harlan smiled again, sensing profit. $14.80. Passage advance, storage, bread, station cot, and inconvenience. Inconvenient, she caused disorder in front of my establishment. Lydia whispered. He locked me in the washroom when I would not give him my mother's brooch. Caleb's jaw tightened. Harlan's smile broke. Isa said, You got proof of that? Lydia did not answer. She looked at her torn sleeve. Caleb took coins from his pocket and laid them one by one on the mercantile's stepdaughter. $14.80. Harlan reached. Caleb set his gloved hand over the coins. Her suitcase first, her letter, her brooch, if it is in your keeping. The storekeeper's throat worked. Caleb waited. The winter wind moved down the street, carrying the smell of coal smoke, wet horses, and bread from the bakery. Lydia could not afford to enter. At last, Harlan tossed the letter down. Then he went inside and returned with a small silver brooch shaped like a dove. Lydia's breath caught when she saw it. Caleb stepped back. Miss Bell. She took the brooch like it might vanish. Now, Caleb said to Harlan. Write a receipt. Asa laughed, though there was less pleasure in it. Well, Marshal, looks like you bought yourself a bride no one wanted. The words struck Lydia harder than the cold. Caleb turned his head slowly. I bought a debt, he said, not a woman. For the first time, Lydia looked directly at him. It was not gratitude in her face, not yet. Gratitude required safety. What she had was suspicion, bruised pride, and the terrible knowledge that rescue could become another kind of cage. Caleb knew that look. He had seen it in prisoners, widows, and horses whipped past reason. He gathered his supplies without another word, paid for each item, and carried them to his wagon. Lydia remained on the boardwalk, uncertain whether she had been freed or merely transferred. When Caleb lifted the last sack of flour, he said, Stage east won't run until Friday. Train west is missed. There's a room at the boarding house if Mrs. Pike has space. I have no money. I know. I will not be your charity. I did not ask you to be. Then, what did you ask? The crowd still watched. Asa still smiled. I need a cook for winter, he said. Temporary. Paid. Separate room. Lock on the door. When the thaw comes, I will take you wherever you wish. Lydia's eyes hardened. So Mr. Grady refused me, and you offer wages instead of vows. That is kinder, I suppose. It is honest. Honesty can still humiliate a person. Caleb accepted the hit because it was true. He lifted her suitcase into the wagon and waited beside it, not touching her, not urging her. Behind them, Asa called, Careful, Miss Bell. Cold men freeze what little warmth a woman has left. Lydia stepped down from the boardwalk. Her flour sack-wrapped foot sank into the mud. She flinched but did not cry out. Caleb moved as if to help. She pulled back. He stopped at once. That was the first thing she noticed about him. He could have taken her arm. He could have commanded. He could have made her small in front of them all. Instead, he stood still and let her climb into the wagon by herself, slow and shaking, with the whole town watching. When Caleb gathered the reins, Lydia sat beside the supplies, not beside him. The marshal, who had ridden into town for flour and lamp oil, turned his wagon toward the open prairie, and Hollow Creek watched him leave with the mistreated bride no one wanted. The first mile passed without a word. The wagon wheels cut dark lines through the snow-damp road. Hollow Creek fell behind them, its church steeple shrinking to a white splinter against the gray sky. Lydia kept both hands around her suitcase, though it sat safely at her feet. Caleb did not tell her she could let go. Men were always telling women when to let go of the last thing they had. The prairie opened wide and merciless. Grass lay flattened beneath frost. Fence posts leaned like tired sentries. Far off, a train whistle moaned from the western line, and Lydia turned toward it with such longing that Caleb almost felt ashamed for hearing it. "You wanted to be on that train," he said. "I wanted to be anywhere I was expected." He nodded once. After a while, he reached behind the seat and took out a wrapped biscuit from his supply tin. He offered it without looking at her. She stared at it. "It is not a bargain," he said. "I did not say it was. You look like you might." Her fingers closed around the biscuit. She ate carefully at first, then too quickly, then stopped as if embarrassed by hunger. Caleb looked at the road. "My ranch is called Mercy Ridge," he said. "It is not merciful, and there is no ridge worth naming. My mother chose it." Is she there?" "No." The word shut like a door. Lydia folded the biscuit cloth and held it in her lap. "I can work. I can cook if there is food, mend if there is thread, keep accounts if there are accounts worth keeping. There are accounts, and if I choose to leave, I will drive you, and if you decide otherwise." He handed her a small iron key. She frowned. "For the room," he said. "You keep it." It was an imperfect kindness. He meant it as proof she would have privacy. She heard it as proof he had already chosen where she would sleep. Her voice turned sharp. "You speak of rooms and keys as if I agreed." Caleb took the rebuke without turning. "Fair." The wagon rolled on. Snow began near dusk, thin as ash at first, then thicker. The cold entered everything. Lydia's wrapped foot had gone numb. Her hands shook despite the biscuit in her stomach. Caleb saw it from the corner of his eye and drew the wagon to a halt beneath a cottonwood. He climbed down, took a blanket from behind the seat, and held it out. "I can manage." "I know." "Then why stop?" "Because managing is not the same as being warm." That made her look away. She took the blanket. A mile later, one of the wagon wheels struck a frozen rut and jolted hard. Lydia's suitcase tipped open. A few things spilled out. A Bible with a cracked cover, a comb missing teeth, a folded apron, 2 letters, and a child's mitten. Caleb stopped the wagon again. Lydia dropped to her knees in the wagon bed, gathering the items with frantic hands. The mitten nearly blew over the side. Caleb caught it before the wind took it and held it out. Her face changed. It was not fear this time. It was grief so raw, he felt he had stepped where no man should step. "My brother's," she said before he asked. "He died last winter." Caleb said nothing. Silence could be respect when words had no right to enter. She took the mitten and tucked it into the Bible. By full dark, the lantern at Mercy Ridge appeared through the snow. The place was larger than Lydia expected, but lonelier than any house should be. A low ranch home stood beside a barn and a smokehouse, all weathered boards and iron hinges. A broken corral gate banged in the wind. No woman's curtain hung in the windows. No child's sled rested by the door. It looked like a place where life had once tried to settle and then changed its mind. Caleb carried the flour inside first. Lydia followed slowly. The kitchen held a black stove, a scarred table, copper pans, a shelf of jars, and a window looking out toward the barn. It was warmer than the wagon, but not welcoming. Too much order. Too little laughter. Caleb set a lamp on the table and struck a match. "This is the kitchen," he said. "Pantry there. Pump outside, but there is a covered barrel by the back door. Your room is down the hall." He walked ahead and opened a small room with a narrow bed, a quilt, a washstand, and a window with a wooden latch. Plain, clean, untouched. Lydia stepped inside and looked at the lock. He placed the key on the washstand. "I sleep in the room by the front door," he said. No one comes down this hall without you knowing. Was this your wife's room? The question came too quickly. She regretted it once. Caleb's face went still. No, but his eyes moved once to the grill. Lydia understood he had lied only by omission. He turned away. There is stew on the stove. Eat what you want, Marshal. He stopped. I owe you $14.80. You owe Holland Voss nothing. I owe you. You can work it off. How much will you count for wages? He hesitated. She gave a bitter smile. You did not think that far. He had not. Caleb Russ, who counted cartridges and nails, had not counted the cost of dignity. $20 a month, he said, plus room and board. Her eyes narrowed. That is too much. It is winter. That is not a reason. It is if I say it is. There it was. The command in him, the marshal, the ranch owner, the man used to deciding and calling it justice. Lydia's shoulders tightened. Do not make generosity another saddle. The words landed hard. Caleb removed his hat. Snow melted along the brim and dripped to the floor. You are right. She had not expected that. He looked at the key on the washstand, then back to her. $12 a month. Room and board. When you have earned $14.80, you might stay for wages or leave with my help. I will put it in writing. Lydia studied him as if searching for the hidden hook. And the lock? Yours. And church? His brow creased. What about it? I live under your roof? People will say things. They already have. That does not mean I wish to feed them. Caleb looked toward the window where the barn lantern swung in the storm. There is an old widow, Mrs. Pike, who takes in women. She is full. Oh, I am trapped by weather and reputation. For tonight, you are sheltered from both. It was not perfect. It was not gentle. But it was the first answer that did not pretend the world was kinder than it was. Later, after stew and silence, Lydia closed her bedroom door and turned the key. She stood listening. No footsteps came. In the kitchen, Caleb sat alone at the table and wrote a contract in his square, plain hand. He wrote her wages. He wrote the debt. He wrote that she could leave at any time. Then he paused. At the bottom, he added one more line. No claim of marriage, service, or debt shall be used to hold Lydia Bell against her will. He sanded the ink, folded the paper, and left it outside her door. In the morning, she found it there beside a pair of wool socks and boots that had belonged to no man. They were worn soft and mended at the ankle. Lydia picked them up and understood that Mercy Ridge had once held a woman after all. The first week at Mercy Ridge was built out of small sounds. The scrape of Lydia's broom across the kitchen floor. The chop of Caleb splitting wood before sunrise. The cough of the stove catching flame. The barn cats crying for milk, the far whistle of trains she could not board yet, singing across the plains as if the world beyond grief was still moving. Lydia did not ask about the woman who had owned the boots. Caleb did not ask about the child's mitten. They worked around each other like people carrying full buckets, careful not to spill what hurt. She cleaned the pantry and found mouse chew sacks, moldy apples, and 3 ledgers tied with twine. By the second day, she had sorted flour from feed, vinegar from lamp oil, and debts from paid accounts. By the third, she told Caleb he was being cheated by a hay seller in Hollow Creek. He looked up from repairing a bridle. How do you know? Because no sane man pays for 12 tons of hay and receives 8. I was occupied with marshalling, with burying things. The words came out before he meant them. Lydia lowered her eyes to the ledger. Numbers do not stay buried. They wait. Caleb almost smiled. It did not reach his mouth, but it came close enough to surprise him. She cooked plainly at first. Beans, cornbread, stew stretched with potatoes. Then one night, he came in from the barn to find the kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon and dried apples. He stopped in the doorway. Lydia was at the table rolling dough with a bottle because she had not found a proper pin. Her sleeves were pushed to her elbows and flour dusted one cheek. She looked younger in the lamplight, though not innocent. Innocence had been taken from her by trains, debts, and men who laughed in public. "I used the last dried apples," she said. "All right. And a little sugar. All right. If sugar is precious, say so." "It is." She paused. "So are apples," he added. "Use both." They ate the pie without naming it a celebration. Trust came in pieces too small to call trust at first. When Lydia hung laundry, Caleb turned his back before passing the line. When she carried water, he did not take the bucket from her hands unless she asked, but he fixed the pump handle so it would not tear her palm. When the mare foaled early in a bitter midnight, Lydia sat in the straw beside Caleb and held the lantern while he worked. The foal came wet and shaking into the world, and Lydia rubbed it with a feed sack until her arms ached. Caleb washed her hands. "Who taught you?" "My mother. Before she took in sewing, she helped at a livery." "You never said. You never asked." He nodded. "I am asking now." "So, little by little," she told him. Her father had worked as a bank clerk in Kansas and trusted a partner who emptied the vault and vanished. Her father died under accusation before he could clear his name. Her mother sewed until her eyesight failed. Her younger brother, Thomas, had coughed through one winter and never saw spring. The brooch was her mother's. The mitten was Thomas's. The letters were all that proved she had once belonged to somebody. When her mother died, Lydia answered Asa Grady's advertisement because he wrote like a man who wanted a wife, not a servant. He promised a home, church standing, an honest partnership. She had not dreamed of romance. She had dreamed of a stove with wood beside it and a table where no landlord knocked. Caleb listened, one hand on the newborn fall, his face half shadowed by lantern light. "He lied," Caleb said. "Yes, men do that when truth costs them. Women do too." He looked at her then. She met his gaze. "I told myself I was not afraid." "That is not a lie. That is a prayer." The foal struggled to stand, all knees and trembling life. Lydia gave a soft laugh despite herself. Caleb heard it like a sound returning to a ruined house. On Sunday, they drove to church. Lydia wore a brown dress she had altered from one found in a cedar trunk. It fit well enough, though the sleeves had been let down with darker cloth. Caleb noticed but said nothing until she climbed into the wagon. "That color suits you." She looked at him quickly. Compliments had become dangerous things in her life. He kept his eyes on the team. "That is all I meant." After a moment, she said, "Sarah." "Thank you." Hollow Creek Church smelled of pine boards, cold wool, and judgment polished thin. Heads turned when Caleb and Lydia entered. The women who had watched her humiliation watched again, this time measuring the distance between her shoulder and his. Reverend Cole preached on charity. His wife did not offer Lydia a place in the women's sewing circle afterward. Asa Grady stood near the door with two ranch hands behind him. "Miss Bell," he said, "Mercy Ridge feeding you well." Caleb's hand did not move toward his gun. It did not need to. Lydia answered before he could. "I earn my bread." Asa smiled. "Miss, I hear you earn more than bread." The churchyard went quiet. Caleb took one step forward. Lydia touched his sleeve. Just 2 fingers. A request, not fear. Caleb stopped. Lydia looked at Asa. A man who refuses a woman at the mercantile has no right to speak of what she earns under another roof. Asa's smile thinned. "Careful, a woman with no name left ought not sharpen her tongue. My name is Lydia Bell. That name owes money in this town." Caleb finally spoke. "Not to you." Asa's eyes shifted. "We will see." On the drive home, Lydia sat beside Caleb for the first time, instead of in the wagon bed. Neither mentioned it. That night, Caleb found her in the kitchen, staring at the church dress draped over a chair. "I should not have touched your sleeve," she said. "It made people think. They think without help." "You wanted to answer him." "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because you asked me not to." She looked up. Those 7 words settled in her chest with more warmth than the stove. "Because you asked me not to." It was not love. Not yet. But it was respect made visible. And for Lydia Bell, who had been bought, judged, mocked, and handled, respect was the first clean water after a long drought. The trouble returned with a thaw that came too early. By late January, the snow softened into gray mud, and the road to Hollow Creek opened enough for riders. Caleb knew Asa Grady would come before he saw him. Men like Asa did not leave a public defeat alone. They fed it until it became an excuse. He arrived near sundown with Harlan Voss and Reverend Cole in a buckboard, all 3 wearing the solemn faces of men who had already chosen their conclusion. Lydia saw them through the kitchen window and went still. Caleb was in the barn loft tossing hay. She could have called him. Instead, she wiped her hands on her apron and opened the front door herself. Asa removed his hat with false courtesy. "Miss Bell, we came to settle a matter." "There is no matter between us." Harlan held up a paper. "There is debt." "My debt was paid." "Your passage debt." "Yes. But Mr. Grady advanced funds for wedding preparation, preacher fee, room preparation, and damages to reputation when you failed to appear." Lydia stared. "Damages to reputation." Asa sighed as if pained. "A man made a fool at the altar suffers loss. You refused me in the street after you shamed me by lateness." Reverend Cole would not meet her eyes. "Sister, it might be best to resolve this quietly. Hollow Creek is a small place. A woman in your position must be above reproach." "My position," Lydia said. "I standing in a doorway I clean with my own hands." Harlan's gaze moved past her into the house, measuring furniture. "If the debt is not paid, property might be claimed." "This is not my property." "Then wages might be garnished." Caleb's voice came from behind them. "No." The 3 men turned. He stood by the barn gate, coat open, hat low, pitchfork still in hand. He looked more rancher than marshal, but the badge was there beneath the dust. Harlan swallowed. "Marshal Russ, we are acting within civil custom." "Custom is what cowards use when law will not hold." Asa stepped down from the buckboard. "You calling me coward?" "So I'm calling your paper worthless." Reverend Cole lifted a hand. "Caleb, anger will not serve, then truth can." The Reverend's face changed at the use of his first name. Once, long before Lydia came, Caleb had stood in his church with another woman. Everyone in Hollow Creek remembered. Caleb wished they did not. Asa saw the flicker and smiled. "Maybe the marshal knows all about failed weddings." Lydia felt the air leave the yard. Caleb's face became stone. Asa leaned closer. "Tell Miss Bell about Mercy Ridge, Russ. Tell her why the women in town pity any female sleeping there." "Enough," Lydia said. The words surprised them all. Caleb most of all. Asa turned on her. "You do not know what you defend. I know what I have seen. You have seen a cold man with a badge and a dead woman's boots in your room." Caleb's hand tightened around the pitchfork. Lydia looked at him then, not with accusation, with understanding that something hidden had been dragged into the mud, like her wedding dress. Harlan waved the paper. "Payment is due by Saturday. $26, Caleb said. "Leave." Asa smiled. "Saturday. At the church steps, public notice. Unless Miss Bell prefers to settle private." Caleb moved. Lydia stepped between them. The yard held its breath. "Go," she said to Asa, "while you still look like men and not thieves." That struck harder than a slap. They left in a spray of mud. Caleb remained by the gate after the wagon vanished. The wind moved around him, lifting loose ice from his sleeve. Lydia waited on the porch until he finally came inside. He washed his hands longer than needed. Her name was Anna, he said. Lydia did not ask who. Caleb dried his hands on a towel. She was my wife for 6 months. Fever took our child before birth. Anna got quiet afterward. I thought quiet meant healing because I wanted it to. Then the north pasture caught fire in August. She rode out to cut loose 2 calves trapped near the old shed. His voice did not break. That made it worse. I found her by the creek, burned hands, smoke in her lungs. She lived until morning. Lydia held the back of a chair. The boots were hers, he said. The room was meant to be a nursery, not hers. After she died, I put things anywhere I did not have to see them. And the town. They brought casseroles for a week. Then advice. Then whispers. Some said I should have stopped her. Some said a better husband would have known she was not right in her mind. Did you believe them? Caleb looked at the stove. Some nights, Lydia felt something inside her ache in recognition. Not the same grief, but the same cruel shape of it. The world loved to hand blame to whoever was still standing. She chose to save what was trapped. Lydia said. Caleb closed his eyes. She left you with sorrow. Lydia continued softly. Not guilt. He gripped the edge of the sink as if weathering a storm. No confession followed. No embrace. Lydia did not cross the room and press her cheek to his shoulder. Some wounds were not doors to be opened by tenderness. They were graves, and one stood beside them in silence until the living could breathe again. The next morning, Lydia searched her suitcase lining for needle thread and found something her mother had hidden so well, even grief had not uncovered it. A folded bank certificate, her father's name, a claim number, a seal from the Territorial Land Office, a note in her mother's fading hand. If ever they call your father thief, take this to the court in Abilene. He held shares in the Black Pine silver claim, not stolen money, owed money. Lydia sat on the floor with the paper in her lap. A hidden fortune, might be, or a dead hope. Caleb found her there. She handed him the certificate without speaking. He read it once, then again. This could clear your father, he said, and pay every debt they invent. It could also bring worse men than Asa. He already came. Caleb folded the paper carefully. We ride to Abilene when the road holds. Saturday comes first. Yes, will you stand with me? Caleb looked at her. Only if you want me standing there. The old Lydia might have said she could stand alone, because pride was sometimes the last coat a cold woman had. This Lydia had spent weeks learning the difference between being helpless and being helped. I do, she said. The words were simple. They were also the nearest thing to a vow either of them dared speak. Saturday arrived with iron clouds and church bells. Hollow Creek gathered because public shame drew a crowd faster than a barn dance. Men stood near the hitching posts. Women clustered by the church steps, gloved hands folded, eyes bright with disapproval and curiosity. Harlan Voss had pinned a notice to the church board, declaring Lydia Bell delinquent in debt to Asa Grady. Reverend Cole stood near it, troubled but silent. Lydia came in Caleb's wagon, wearing the brown dress and Anna's mended boots. The choice had not been careless. She had asked Caleb before dawn, "May I wear them today?" He had looked at the boots in her hands for a long time. Then he nodded. They carried a brave woman once, Lydia said. Maybe they can carry another. Caleb turned away then, but not before she saw his eyes. Now, as he helped her down from the wagon without gripping her arm, the town saw the boots, the dress, the woman, and the marshal beside her. Asa Grady waited on the steps with his paper. Miss Bell, Marshal, I expected payment, not theater. Lydia walked forward. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. But she did not lower her eyes. I owe you nothing. Asa held up the paper. The notice says otherwise. The notice lies. A murmur stirred. Harlan snapped. Careful. Lydia drew the folded certificate from her reticule. My father was accused of theft because men with cleaner coats than his moved money through accounts he did not control. My mother died with this hidden because fear taught her silence. I will not inherit that fear. Asa frowned. He had not expected anything beyond tears. Caleb stepped forward and addressed the crowd. The paper Mr. Grady posted has no court seal, no witness of service, and no lawful accounting. It is intimidation dressed as debt, Harlan protested. You are not judge here. No, but I know fraud when it is nailed to a church wall. Reverend Cole finally looked at the notice. His face reddened. Harlan, is there no filing? Harlan stammered. Customary claims do not always require. Fraud does not become custom because men repeat it, Caleb said. Asa's temper broke through the polish. She came to marry me. I paid for her. I can claim damages. Lydia's voice rang clear. Oh, God, bride is not livestock. The churchyard went still. Asa stepped toward her. You think a dead clerk's daughter can speak to me that way? Caleb moved between them. This time, Lydia did not stop him. The gesture was small, but the meaning passed through everyone watching. Not possession, protection freely permitted. Asa's hand drifted near his coat. Caleb's voice dropped. Though not, for a moment, the entire town balanced on the edge of gun smoke. Then a boy shouted from the street. Fire! Smoke rose beyond the mercantile. Not from the store, from the freight shed behind it, where winter supplies, kerosene crates, and 2 stable horses were kept. A lantern had fallen in the wind, or been left too near straw. Flames licked up the sideboards, hungry and fast. The crowd scattered into panic. Caleb ran first, but Lydia was only a few steps behind. The fire cracked through dry wood. Harlan screamed about inventory. Someone yelled that the horses were trapped. Caleb seized an A-share from the blacksmith and slammed it into the shed latch. Smoke poured out, thick and black. A horse shrieked inside. Stay back, Caleb ordered. Lydia did not. She grabbed a wet horse blanket from a trough, flung it over her shoulders, and ducked low beneath the smoke. Caleb cursed and followed. Inside was heat, terror, and orange light. One horse had broken its lead and thrashed against the wall. The other was tied tight, eyes rolling white. Lydia coughed hard, half blind, but found the knot by touch. Her fingers remembered the newborn foal, the livery lessons from her mother, the trembling of animals that expected pain. Easy, she whispered. Easy, girl. The knot would not give. Caleb cut it with his knife. A beam cracked overhead. Ow, he shouted. The freed horse bolted. Caleb dragged the second toward the opening. Lydia stumbled over a fallen crate. Flames climbed the wall beside her. For one terrible heartbeat, Caleb saw another woman in smoke. Anna by the creek. Anna's burned hands. Anna beyond saving. Then Lydia coughed his name. Not Marshall. Not Rusk. Caleb. He went back. He lifted the crate from her skirt, wrapped one arm around her waist with no thought but life, and carried her through fire-lit smoke into the street. They fell together in the mud as the shed roof collapsed behind them. The town went silent. Lydia gasped for air, soot streaking her face. Caleb knelt over her, one hand braced in the mud, the other shaking near her shoulder but not touching until she looked at him. Then she reached for his sleeve. He took her hand. Asa, Harlan suddenly cried. My strong box! Everyone turned. Near the shed wall, half hidden under spilled freight, lay a small iron strongbox dragged from the mercantile records shelf. Its lid had sprung open in the fall. Papers spilled out, some singed, some stamped. Caleb picked up one before the wind took it. His eyes hardened. Harlan tried to snatch it. That is private. Caleb held it away. The paper bore Lydia's name. Not a debt, but a receipt. Passage fee, paid in full, by Asa, ready before her arrival. Marked bride consideration and signed by Harlan. Beneath it were other papers, charges added after, false accounts. A note regarding the Black Pine claim. Asa had known about the certificate. He had meant to marry Lydia, take her claim, and bury her father's truth under his name. The crowd understood slowly, then all at once. Lydia stood with mud on her dress and smoke in her lungs. "You knew," Asa back toward his horse. "That paper means nothing." Caleb drew his revolver. "Not fast, not dramatic. Certain. It means fraud, coercion, attempted theft, and might be arson, if that lantern was meant to burn records before they were read." Asa looked at Harlan. Harlan looked away. That was confession enough for the crowd. Reverend Cole stepped down from the church porch, his face stricken. "Miss Bell, I owe you words I should have given sooner." Lydia's eyes were full, but she did not let the tears fall. "Not now." The Reverend bowed his head. Caleb bound Asa's hands himself. Harlan too. When he led them past Lydia, Asa spat into the mud. "You still think he wants you?" Asa sneered. "He only saves what is burning, because he failed once." Caleb stopped. Lydia stepped forward, smoke-stained and trembling. "No," she said. "He saves what deserves to live." It was the bravest thing anyone had ever said about him. And Caleb, Cold Marshal Russ, had to turn away before the whole town saw what those words did to his face. The storm struck before they could leave Hollow Creek. By dusk, snow came hard from the north, closing the road to Mercy Ridge and rattling every window in town. Asa and Harlan were locked in the jail, cursing through iron bars. Reverend Cole opened the church hall for stranded families, and Mrs. Pike brought blankets, broth, and the kind of firm tenderness that needed no permission. Lydia sat near the stove with a cup of tea, warming her bruised hands. Children stared at the soot on her dress until Mrs. Pike told them heroes were allowed to look untidy. Caleb stood by the door, watching the storm. He had spent years guarding thresholds, jail doors, ranch gates, rooms where grief slept. Now, for the first time in a long while, he did not know whether to stay outside or come in. Lydia looked up. "You can sit. I am wet. S.O. is half the county." He removed his hat and sat beside her, leaving a careful space. For a time they listened to the wind strike the church walls. The same church that had held whispers now held everyone close, because weather cared nothing for reputation. Reverend Cole came to them near midnight. "Miss Bell," he said, voice low, "I failed you. I saw your torn dress and believed trouble had followed you because of your character, not because trouble often follows the undefended. I let men use my steps for cruelty. I am sorry." Lydia held the cup in both hands. Silence stretched long enough for apology to become uncomfortable, which was sometimes necessary. "At the Mercantile," she said at last, "I looked for one Christian face to say I was not an animal for sale." The Reverend flinched. "I cannot give you that moment back," he said. "No. What can I do? Tell the truth where you help silence it?" He nodded. "I will." Mrs. Pike came next, less formal and more tearful. Two women from the sewing circle followed in shame, offering mended cloth and apologies that came awkward but sincere. Lydia accepted some, refused others, and discovered that forgiveness did not require pretending harm had been small. By morning, the storm had buried the town to the wagon hubs. Caleb went to check the jail. Lydia went with Mrs. Pike to help serve breakfast. In the Mercantile, now under Deputy Seal, they found shelves of supplies Harlan had hoarded while families bought on credit at twice their worth: flour, coffee, lamp oil, blankets. The very supplies Caleb had ridden in to buy. Under the court order Caleb wrote and Reverend Cole witnessed, the goods were distributed to those holding honest receipts. Lydia stood behind the counter, handing sacks to widows, miners, and ranch wives who would not quite meet her eyes. A little girl with red mittens approached and whispered, "Mama says you saved the horses." Lydia smiled. The marshal cut the rope. "Mama says brave people can be scared. Your mama is wise." The girl gave Lydia one red mitten, then ran away embarrassed. Lydia held it, and for a moment Thomas' little mitten in her Bible no longer felt only like a grave. It felt like memory warming beside new life. 2 days later, the road opened. A circuit judge arrived from Abilene after Caleb sent wire by rail. Asa Grady's men deserted him before noon. Harlan Voss tried to claim misunderstanding until the judge read the forged accounts aloud. The Black Pine certificate proved valid, and while it did not make Lydia rich overnight, it restored her father's name and promised enough money to choose her future without begging any man for shelter. That evening, Lydia stood at the train station with her suitcase repaired, her mother's brooch pinned to her collar, and the certificate tucked safe inside Caleb's coat until the bank could receive it. The westbound train hissed beside the platform. Caleb stood a few feet away, hands gloved, face unreadable. "You said, when I earned the debt, you would take me wherever I wished," Lydia said. "Yes, I have earned it." "You have? And if I choose the train, I will put your suitcase aboard." The words cost him. She heard the price and loved him for paying it without complaint. "And if I choose Mercy Ridge?" The cold marshal's composure cracked so quietly, only she could see. "Then I will drive slow," he said. "So the road does not jolt your foot." Lydia smiled, but tears filled her eyes. "Caleb?" He looked at her fully. "I will not be Anna, I know. I will not be your rescue to keep you from grief, I know. And I will not marry because a town needs my reputation cleaned." His voice was rough. "Good." The train bell clanged. Lydia looked at the cars, at the doors open to everywhere else. She had dreamed for weeks of leaving Hollow Creek behind. But leaving was not the same as freedom if fear chose the direction. She turned back to Caleb. "Ask me in spring." His brow lifted. "To court me," she said, "properly. With no debt between us, no pity, no locked doors except the ones I choose to close." The smallest smile touched his mouth. "Spring then. Until then, I am still your cook, my accounts keeper," he corrected, "and full watcher, and high thief detector." She laughed, and this time the sound did not surprise him. It warmed him. When they returned to the wagon, half the town had gathered again, not to shame her now, but to witness what they had failed to protect before. Mrs. Pike hugged Lydia hard. Reverend Cole gave Caleb a signed statement clearing Lydia's name to be read in church on Sunday. The little girl with red mittens tucked the paper flower into Lydia's suitcase strap. Then Harlan's replacement, an older man from Abilene, came out of the mercantile carrying the supplies Caleb had first come for weeks ago. Flour, coffee, salt pork, lamp oil, nails. Caleb loaded them into the wagon. Lydia watched him and felt the circle close. The cold Cowboy Marshal had ridden into town for supplies and left with a mistreated bride no one wanted. Now he stood in that same muddy street, loading supplies again, while that same woman climbed into his wagon by choice, with her name cleared, her head high, and a town learning too late what worth looked like. As Caleb took the reins, Asa Grady was brought from the jail in irons for transport. He saw Lydia in the wagon and curled his lip. "No one wanted you," he said. Before Caleb could speak, Lydia answered, "I wanted myself enough to live." The deputy pulled Asa onward. Caleb looked at her, and the winter sun broke thinly through the clouds. At Mercy Ridge, spring did not come all at once. It arrived in drips from the eaves, in mud at the barn door, in the fall kicking up its heels in the corral. Lydia planted beans beside the kitchen window. Caleb prepared the nursery room, not to erase what it had meant, but to let it become something else. A sewing room first, then a reading room, then whatever the future asked. He did not court her with grand speeches. He courted her by bringing wild plum blossoms in a tin cup, by asking before moving her chair closer to the stove, by teaching her to shoot at fence post cans and accepting without pride when she became better than him, by riding beside her to Abilene when the bank confirmed the first payment from the Black Pine claim. She courted him too, though neither named it at first. She left coffee warming when he rode night patrol. She placed Anna's boots in a cedar chest with lavender, not hidden in sorrow, but honor. She read aloud from the newspaper while he sharpened tools, and sometimes her hand rested near his on the table, until one evening he turned his palm upward. She placed her hand in his. That was all. It was enough. In April, Lydia to church. The prairie had turned green in shy patches, and the air smelled of wet earth instead of smoke. Reverend Cole read his statement before the congregation, naming the wrong done to Lydia Bell, naming the fraud, naming the cowardice of silence. Then he stepped aside. Lydia rose from the pew. "I accept the truth being told," she said. "Forgiveness will come where it can. Trusts will come slower." No one argued. Outside, beneath the church bell, Caleb removed his hat. "Miss Bell," he said, formal as a schoolboy and twice as nervous, "may I call on you with honorable intention? You live in the same house. I can stand on the porch and knock. You would freeze. I have survived worse." Her smile softened. "Yes, Marshal, you might call." He did. That very evening, he stepped out into the yard, waited in the cold, and knocked on his own front door. Lydia opened it laughing. Behind her, the kitchen glowed with lamplight. Bread cooled on the table. Coffee steamed. The red mitten from the little girl hung near Thomas's old one on a shelf, not replacing it, only keeping it company. The house did not feel empty anymore. By June, Mercy Ridge held a wedding. Not a rushed arrangement, not a bargain, not a rescue mistaken for love. A wedding chosen in full daylight, with Mrs. Pike crying into a handkerchief, the little red-mitten girl scattering wildflowers, Reverend Cole speaking gently, and half of Hollow Creek standing humbled beneath a clean blue sky. Lydia wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself. Her mother's dove brooch shone at her throat. Caleb wore his marshal's coat, brushed but still plain, because Lydia said she did not want him polished into a stranger. When vows came, Caleb's voice was steady. "I will not hold you by debt, fear, pity, or name. I will stand beside you as long as you choose me, and earn that choosing as long as I live." Lydia's eyes shone. "I will not run from old wounds or live inside them," she said. "I choose this home, this work, this life, and this man, not because he saved me once, but because he let me become whole after." The kiss was gentle. The cheer that followed startled birds from the cottonwoods. That night, after the guests had gone and the lanterns burned low, Lydia and Caleb stood by the corral, watching the foal sleep beside its mother. "Do you ever miss silence?" Lydia asked. Caleb looked toward the house, where dishes waited, flowers leaned in jars, and laughter still seemed caught in the rafters. "No," he said. "I mistook it for peace." She leaned her shoulder against his arm. The prairie wind moved over Mercy Ridge, soft and wide. Somewhere far away, a train whistle called through the dark, no longer sounding like escape. Lydia listened until it faded, then turned with Caleb toward the kitchen warmth. The woman no one wanted had become the heart of a home. The cold Marshal, who trusted only duty, had learned tenderness without losing strength. And the town that once watched cruelty in silence now remembered the day a man came for flour and lamp oil, and left carrying something far more precious into the storm. Not a bride he had bought, not a woman he had claimed, but a life he had chosen to protect until she could choose him back.